Do not approach Fair Seas Cruise Liner 887. Day 1. I am sorry, I am short on words. The last 2 days have been such a blur of joy. It finally happened. I'm finally married. And now we're on our honeymoon. From the service to the reception to this cruise ship. Oh wow. I had been so worried and so anxious about everything going perfectly, and I shouldn't have been, because they all went absolutely perfectly. I have my Grace. She's all mine, and I'm all hers. Every glance exchanged is ecstasy. Every brush across her is a tingle of bliss. I almost feel well enough to stop this journaling. But I've been down that road before, and I've got to keep this up. And not for myself, but for Grace. I don't like to think about it. I don't want to think about it or write about it, what is now light years behind me. Even if maybe I should. But I can't ruin this moment. This is my first time on a cruise. It's a lot like a luxury hotel on the sea. We have a gorgeous cabin towards the bow of the ship on the middle decks. It's all mine and all hers. I'm gonna keep it happy. I'm gonna keep it happy. I'm gonna keep it on the level. I'm gonna keep the whirlwind going. I'm not gonna let my brain ruin my honeymoon. Day 2. My favorite part about yesterday was when Grace and I laughed at the other newlyweds reenacting the Titanic "I'm flying" Jack scene. Admittedly, I woke up differently than I did yesterday. I feel like I'm riding a carousel that's breaking down. I can feel myself slowing down and yet slipping at the same time. I hear the music turn to a din and all the lights dim and dull. All of it's getting slow and tired and annoying in my head. I think I hit the wall in bed last night. Maybe it was the dinner. Maybe it was all the fun drinking. Either way, I don't have time to struggle with this. This is my honeymoon, god damn it. I can't let this ruin my life. I cannot let this ruin my life. I cannot let this ruin Grace's honeymoon. No matter how many times it pangs in my head, I know Grace loves me. I know she would understand, but I owe her everything. I owe her each and every day of my life. And I've got to show her I'm grateful and that I can start by trying to get past this for her and for me. I know she doesn't regret marrying me. That's all in my head. It's all in my head. Day 3. A lot has happened. Nothing between Grace and I, but I mean with the cruise. At some point early this morning, I looked out my window and I saw another ship docked with our cruise liner. It was a small ship, much smaller than ours. We were notified later a brief interruption to our cruise to respond to a distress signal from a small fishing vessel that had lost power and had ill crew members. That was the official notice, at least. There is a rumor going around the vessel that the crew was lost on was damaged, and the crew had been stricken with hunger for a long period of time, and things were so desperate on board that they started eating their own catch to survive. Grace and I slept in most of the day, and we heard most of this from the rest of the passengers while we were standing in the lunch line. While we were standing there, there was some kind of altercation or fight between the crew of the fishing boat and some of the cruise patrons in the main dining hall. We could hear the fight and the yelling and the screaming from behind the door. The fight was apparently so severe that the whole dining area was then shut down by the cruise crew. So we decided to go back to our room and order some room service instead. After we ordered, her and I got intimate and realized afterwards that 2 hours had passed. When Grace picked up the phone to check on the food, there was an emergency message playing on the cabin phone for every official number we dialed. I begged to Grace to stay in the cabin until the situation was resolved by the crew, but Grace, always the hero of everyone's story, wanted to see if she could be of assistance with her medical expertise. But when she tried the door to the cabin, it was locked. We were definitely locked in. We made contact with our cabin neighbors by sticking our heads out the window and shouting for them. They were also locked in. Up and down the 8-story cabin section, folks were locked down in their cabins. So I started posting this online because folks should know that something has gone very wrong on this cruise liner. Day 4. I had to condense this entry a few times to make it small enough to send, as the ship is suffering intermittent electrical and communication failures. I figured if I cut it down enough, I could get it to send in the short windows where things are working. One of the power failures permitted us to escape our cabin, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. It started in the first class cabins at the very top of the deck in our bow section. Grace and I were talking to the neighbors in the cabins above ours when one of the wives started to tell us that someone was at their cabin door. She relayed from her husband at the door that it was one of the ship's crew and that they were trying to unlock their door. Right now, I can't exactly say what they did after that. All we could hear were the screams of the wife and the kids and the husband in the room. Then it was their neighbors. And then it was their neighbors' neighbors. First 6, then a dozen, then it was 3 dozen, then the whole top first-class deck screaming and then turning silent. Grace and I first tried to pry our door open, occasionally discussing strategies with our adjacent and lower-level neighbors through the window. Try as we did, we could not open the door. We did the next best thing. We prepared ourselves. Well, she prepared us. I was a wreck. As she started to barricade the door and snap off the legs of chairs and rummaging through the kitchen for something sharp to make a spear out of one of the legs, she paused to ask me if I had taken my medicine. And I was honest with her. I told her I didn't. I told her I hadn't taken it since the wedding, that I was riding on inertia because I wanted to feel real for this. She told me that it was a sweet gesture, but ill-advised. She told me to take it for her. When I sat with my arms and legs crossed on the bed, staring at the sheets, she put the pill in my lips and she kissed me, and I swallowed my antidepressant. She told me I'd start feeling better. She handed me the leg of the tall nightstand table, and she told me to remember my softball days. She made a swinging motion with her arm. Then we heard screaming on our floor. Whoever it was now was moving in. It was always the same, screaming and yelling and then nothing. Then the power went out, and Grace tried the door and discovered it was unlocked. So we started to run down the deck, heading aft as we banged our makeshift spears and bat on the cabin doors, yelling to people to get out while the power was down. We weren't well received initially, but several of our cruise mates followed us down the hall. One of my cruise mates accidentally knocked me down, and while I was down, I caught my first glimpse of them. The crew. As they rounded a service junction in the deck, they were pale, with sickly yellowed eyes rolled up to the top of their heads. Their eyes were fixed open with tears perpetually streaming down their face. They moved in a slow, mechanical, and yet jerky fashion. They turned at the waist first before moving their torso, and then finally their heads in the same direction they wanted to see or move. Their heads were perpetually tilted back, with drool and snot running from their mouth and nose respectively. They made sniffling, gargling noises before more drool and snot bubbled out. Their breathing was stiff, slow, heavy, and labored. They didn't seem to acknowledge us, and they barely acknowledged each other's space as they often piled into each other like concert-goers. They weren't just the crew either. They were also the passengers as well, and more of them streamed down each stairwell to the next deck, our deck. When I finally saw one of them up close, each and every one of them had a long, thin, cone-shaped seashell, either in their hand or tucked into their ear. One of them had something thin, black, and wet in their nose. I could see something poking out of one of their nostrils. It looked like they had the consistency of a thick black noodle. Something was very, very wrong with them. One of the gentlemen who escaped their cabin at the same time we did panicked upon seeing one of them up close, and took a chair from their cabin and broke it across their head, neck, and shoulder. The guy, when he was hit, didn't even stagger. He didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. Sure, his face and neck bruised up bad, and a cut on his forehead bled profusely, but the guy lined up to the next door just the same with 4 others, ready to do what they had been doing on the upper decks. We ran faster, as after they entered the room, there was screaming again, and then nothing. We decided we had to try to find a safe space to barricade to try to signal another ship and take cover and hope for rescue. Oh, here's my last note. Grace thinks they may have been inflicted with some kind of cone snail, cone shell parasite. Something we've not seen before. Something we haven't seen because for all of the amazement of space, the deep sea is still also vastly unexplored and unknown. They're probably something the fishermen came into contact with while sailing further out because of the changing fishing patterns in the warming waters. When they started to eat their own catch, this is again purely her speculation here, they were probably exposed to this new unknown sea creature that appears to be very venomous. Gray speculates they have some kind of neurotoxin that can alter the mental state of its victims. I added that they might be using the moist nasal cavities as a place to live while inhabiting the host, and continually dosing them with the neurotoxin. I'll also add I think that they're controlling their hosts, not just merely altering their mental state. Day 5. I don't know what to say. They got me. She didn't let them get to her. I'm running out of time. They've got everyone on the ship, except a few of us. I'm not sure why I'm immune from the poison, or why they didn't take us over like everyone else. Maybe it's my antidepressant. There were thousands of them, and they cornered about 30 of us left on the upper deck at the aft section. Nowhere to run. They shambled up literally 1,000 people deep, occupying every free square foot of the deck space, in a jumbled mass of wet-faced, yellow-eyed, sniffing bags of corrupted human flesh. They stacked up one by one closer and closer to us. The guys with us took whatever weapons they could find. Like before, hit after hit, jab after jab, stab after stab, they were unfazed. Only when the bones were broken did gravity take hold and bring them down. As their spears and clubs shattered, they took to hand fighting. Then it became apparent what was happening in each and every cabin. A pair in front took a beating, while 2 others from behind took the hand they held the shell in, or moved the shell from behind their ear to their nose, before they held it at their waist. Then the possessed with the shell stepped forward with a briskness uncharacteristic to those taking the beating, and with one lightning-fast jab, they struck each of the persons attacking them. The attack, the stinger of the cone snail, inflicted nearly instantaneous collapse and excruciating pain. I saw 6 grown men, taller and stronger than even most men, crumble to dust in the most agonizing, howling, pathetic whimper I've ever heard. While they writhed and flailed and convulsed on the ground, gasping for breath to yelp, they brought forth a bloated piece of meat. Only when it came to rest in front of us, in front of the painfully paralyzed men, did it occur to me that this piece of meat, this thing used to be a person also. This woman, her limbs and skull had all atrophied, shrunken down, skin taut to the bone. The shallow motion of her chest betrayed the fact that somehow she was still alive, or at least this hunk of meat was still breathing. Whatever was going on inside had abruptly stopped as they leveled her to the deck, and pinkish fluid flowed from every orifice. In the pinkish sludge, 6 snails inched their way towards the 6 men, grasping for breath in a rigor mortis state on the deck. They crawled in through their ears and noses. One by one they stood up and tilted their heads back, as if nothing had happened, and they had become one of them. As I watched this in shock, Grace grabbed me by the waist, staggered in terror back, and then she climbed up on the ledge overlooking the 6 stories to the lower deck. She asked me the same way she proposed to me, but almost in reverse. She asked me like the same way we first met, when I was on the balcony edge, when she asked me to take a step with her, a step back. As she grabbed hold of me, 2 others in the group jumped up on the balcony ledge and then jumped off, with their short screams and long thuds on the deck. I hesitated. She missed grabbing my other arm, and she twisted awkwardly before tumbling over in a short yelp and the same long thud to the deck. I looked over the ledge at her, a pool of blood joining the others on the deck. It was supposed to be me. It was supposed to be our blood. It was supposed to be like that years ago, but just me. Grace, I failed you. I should have taken your hand and jumped with you. It took me everything once before to take your hand, and to not jump. To be here with you now, to be the only woman you said you ever loved. I had been all alone, standing on so many ledges before, and when it mattered, I let you down. So much medicine and therapy to get myself to not do what I must have in that moment, what I should have, to death do us part in that moment. And then they got me. I was jabbed. When I didn't fall screaming and crying, I was jabbed again. But the worst pain was just the jabbing. The rest of the effect, the rest of the poison didn't faze me. I was in shock because of you. Something, like I said before, prevented me from turning to a human jitterbug like the others. As I held my blood in from the stab wound, they brought over another body, another egg-laden host. It burst again like a pink water balloon, and the snail crawled up my leg and over my body and neck and slid into my nose. It felt like tickling at first, and then felt like the worst sinus infection ever before the snail wiggled out of my nose and dried up on the deck. They stopped paying attention to me after that. I'm back to square one. There's only about a dozen of us left. Each of us have a history of depression, or at least being medicated for it. The poison hurts, but it didn't render us to the hosts. They aren't paying attention to us now. I think they think we're one of them, probably because there's still the venom in our veins. This is my last message. This is the last message from the ship. We decided we can't risk you finding us and boarding the ship, and incidentally carrying this parasite to land. We're going to scuttle this cruise liner with a homemade bomb we constructed from chemicals we found in storage. We are going to do it before they're able to repair the ship and figure out how to guide it to a port. They're making progress. This is, after all, how I'm able to send this message at all. I assume they're trying to signal you as well, to find them, to attack you, and then spread this parasite. We're going to do it. We're going to do it before we might still succumb to the poison. By the time you read this, hopefully we are beneath the waves. Suicide is selfish, but this feels more like sacrifice. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt to recover this wreck. If for some reason we are not successful, please Send a Navy vessel to destroy the ship. Do not attempt any rescue. I'll see you soon, Grace.